Mr. Carlson, they want you on stage, sir. Roger Carlson looked up from his reflection in the mirror and turned to look at the young woman in the doorway. How do I look? He asked, smiling hugely as he fixed her with his regard. She flushed a little. You look great, Mr. Carlson. I was hoping I could get an autograph, if it's not too much to ask. The young woman looked flushed as she held out the paper. Roger grinned as he took it, scrolling his name across the front before handing it back to her. She took it shyly, sliding a lock of brown hair behind her ear. Another fan, of course, but Roger was used to them by now. He'd been signing autographs for the last 10 years, but this was the first one that he had actually earned. No more raunchy Roger, or audience of drunken frat boys. He was done with that now. All of that was behind him. Maybe now he could bask in the light of honest fans who weren't just here for the juvenile humor. Maybe now he could do some serious work, something they would take seriously. So, what'd you think of the movie? Oh, it was okay. I've been a fan of you for a while, though. I used to love your stand-up. That took him back a little. The general consensus from female viewers had always been pretty negative. Raunchy Roger had been beloved by stoners and drunks, and his humor had followed suit pretty well. The character had been great when he'd been doing stand-up, and it had followed him through the last 7 years as the studio he worked for pumped out dumb movie after dumb movie. Raunchy Roger Goes to College, Raunchy Roger Private Eye, Raunchy Roger and the Booby Trap, on and on and on. He wasn't used to girls telling him they liked his work. She looked like she wanted to say more, but at that moment the band picked up and she flushed, looking a little flustered. I think they're playing you on. Knock 'em dead, she said. Roger gave her a wink and walked towards the stage. The crowd erupted into applause as he came out, and Roger basked in the warm regard as he walked towards the couch. The manager had been adamant about him doing this talk show circuit. Guy David was his first stop, and if he made a good impression here, he could keep making the rounds and pumping his new movie. This was no raunchy Roger flick either. He had starred in a serious movie for once, and he needed it to do well. He desperately needed to move out from under the shadow of raunchy Roger. Guy came out to shake his hand, and as he sat, he heard a chorus of male voices yelling, "Raunchy Roger!" from the back row. He gave them a polite wave and turned his attention to Guy. Here on my couch tonight, we have a real legend in the world of comedy. Raunchy Roger himself, Roger Carlson, everybody. The applause were twinged with some boos this time, but Roger felt it was the same level of appreciation as before. Thanks, Guy. It's a pleasure to be here. So you went from starring in a series of B-list movies that appealed to college kids and habitual drunks to starring in a major box office smash. What's that like, Roger? Guy's teeth gleamed whitely in the overheads, and Roger felt almost blinded. Guy wore the same dark blue suit he always did. His graying hair swooped back in one of those Johnny Carson imitation doos that he had worn since the first show. Guy was a relic. He had been on his show since the late 70s, and he showed no signs of going anywhere. Roger imagined that there was probably a girl or two in the wings getting ready to snipe his career, but maybe she would wait until he was done with his interview if he was lucky. It's been an amazing ride, Guy, to go from doing something like Raunchy Roger to starring in a big Hollywood picture like Carter's Promise. The crew I worked with was amazing, and it was an honor to work with the beautiful Margot Thames. A wolf whistle came from the back, and the crowd laughed. Speaking of Miss Thames, you two appear to have some real chemistry on screen. Anything there with you two? The crowd made some oohing noises, but Roger ignored them. That's called acting, Guy. I can assure you that while Miss Thames is a lovely woman, there is absolutely nothing romantic between us. That had been by design. Roger had been lying in a bathtub in New Mexico last year, mostly filled with his own vomit, and had looked up stuporously to see his agent, Claude, sitting on the toilet, with a long, suffering look and puke drying on his shirt. Roger had been time-traveling again, which was what he called it when he got blackout drunk, and he had been hitting it hard last night. He had come out of his stupor quick enough when Claude had told him that he'd been giving him CPR for the last 10 minutes. That was a wake-up call. You need to sort yourself out, Roger. I'm tired of hauling your ass out of the fire. I'm your agent, not your mother. The next time you decide to self-destruct, don't drag me down with you. Roger had cried, tears cutting through the grime and puke, and Claude had put a hand on his shoulder. Let me help you, Raj. Let me help you get out of this loop. Claude had dropped him off at rehab the same day. After 6 months of puking and shaking and going to countless meetings, he felt like he might be getting better. After 6 months, he had been ready to leave and see if he could maintain this new sober life of his. He had made a promise to himself in rehab, a promise that he would do better. Raunchy Roger was not the cause of his problems, but he was a symptom. Raunchy Roger liked to party. Raunchy Roger liked to sleep with anything with a pulse. Raunchy Roger liked to abuse prescription medication. And if he was going to get his life back together, he had to cleave from Raunchy Roger. When Claude had come to him with a script for Carter's Promise, he had made it clear that he couldn't Roger up the set. Rogering up something was a word Claude had used for ruining it, and Roger had agreed. He had drank nothing stronger than orange juice and water, kept up his workout routine, and put nothing stronger than aspirin in his body since coming out of rehab. A set would have access to the things from his past. Working on a set again would be the real test of his mettle. In the 8 months of shooting, he'd been tempted, but he had not succumbed. He was sitting here now, a better man. This is quite a transition for you, isn't it? From doing something like Raunchy Roger to a serious film like Carter's Promise. Roger realized he'd been wool-gathering and snapped out of it. It's been quite a change, but a change for the better, he said, smiling out at the crowd. They didn't clap this time, and that seemed a little off-putting. So, Glenmere Studios hasn't issued any statements on when their next Raunchy Roger movie will come out. Can you give us any insights? Roger furrowed his brow. Of course, this is why they wanted him here. As far as I know, the series is canceled. The last film will be the end of them. Several people in the audience made displeased noises, but somewhere in the back, someone laughed. It was an odd sound amongst the discomfort, and Roger found himself looking for whoever had made it. He was used to people laughing at him, but it sounded so alien at that moment. It sounded not altogether real. Guy seemed shocked. After all this time? We're talking about a series that's been going on for 7 years. Yes, well, now I'm moving on. I think we can finally put the character to rest. In the low rumbles from the crowd, he heard that laughter again. It was subtle, maybe 1 or 2 people, but it rankled him. He searched again for the source, but couldn't see anything. The house lights were always down when someone was on stage, and it made a murky soup out of the audience. The lights in his eyes didn't help matters either, and he found himself squinting against them. Well, out of respect for the recently deceased, maybe you can give us some classic Raunchy Roger lines? Guy asked, looking at the audience who began to clap like a bunch of sheep. Roger felt like screaming. Claude had told him this interview was all about the new movie, not his past. He didn't even want to think back on those drunken days when Roger had ruled his life, but it seemed to be all anyone wanted. The crowd was actually laughing now, cheering and egging him on, but the grating laughter still lingered amongst them. It was like an ice pick against his temple, that mechanical laughter that skittered through the crowd too fast to be discovered. They quieted down when he didn't laugh along with them, or stand up to oblige. I don't think so, Guy. I'm here to talk about Carter's Promise, not to rehash old material. He tried to ignore that grating chuckle, but it was becoming harder and harder to keep his cool. Oh, come on, just a few bits. What about the priest and the communion wine? I know that always makes me chuckle. How about it, folks? They applauded, but Roger barely heard them. All he could hear were the snickers, the chuckles, those mean little titters from the lips of fools. Look, I appreciate how many of you are fans of Raunchy Roger, but that's not me anymore. That's a part of my life I'm trying to put behind myself. I just want to forget about it and move on to more important things. A chuckle rumbled up from the audience, not altogether the artificial laughter he'd been hearing, and Roger felt his temper flare. I told the studio I wasn't going to do it anymore, okay? I'm a real actor now, he shouted. The back of the house bubbled with canned laughter, and Roger thought he saw people standing up in the back row. Were they smiling? They moved up to the next row, blackness swirling in that tepid sea of shadows that threatened to take in the next row of people. The scowling faces in front of them seemed to melt into smiles, their sudden laughter joining the rising din from the back of the house. They were laughing. They were laughing at him. Roger had been laughed at all of his life, but this was the first time it truly made him furious. I'm glad I did it too. I killed Raunchy Roger. He was made of the worst, darkest parts of me, and I'm glad he's dead, Roger shouted at the crowd, rising up from the couch and stalking towards them. He balled up his fists. They couldn't come and hear about his new project. They all had to pick the meat off the carcass of his old work. They wanted to hear the joke about the lesbian sisters, the nun who moonlighted as a dominatrix, the menacing priest he had barely escaped in his youth. and all those Raunchy Roger classics that had transcended his stand-up and made it onto screen. Roger, you maybe should calm down a little. I'm not doing it anymore. Do you hear me? I'm not dancing for your amusement. Raunchy Roger was a misogynistic prick, a cancer that had to be removed. I'm a better person now. The crowd erupted into a flurry of canned laughter. They were really laughing at him now. They were mocking his suffering. They were mocking his journey. He had escaped a life that meant to kill him, and these assholes were mocking him. They didn't have the slightest idea what it was like to live under the shadow of Raunchy Roger. They didn't have a clue what it felt like to step out from under that weight. I'm a real actor, he screamed, not some clown that struts about to make you laugh at his antics. I moved on. Maybe you should move on too. But the closer he got to the crowd, the more he noticed them change. The blackness tore through them like a disease, and what had begun in the back was now rioting through the middle and working its way to the stage. The crowd, buried in that hazy blackness, grinned at him with two wide smiles and two white teeth. They leered at him, jumping seats and coming forward in a horror movie shuffle of propelled bodies. Roger backed away a step, almost tripping on the rug that stretched over the stage. He could hear the canned laughter ripping through the whole studio, and one of the band members began to chortle even as Roger backed away. The chortler fell over suddenly, his drum set falling with him, and he convulsed as the laughter was ripped from him and became the same mirthless screech that ran through the crowd. Guy began to giggle behind his desk, the laughter bubbling up painfully as Roger turned to run. The tide of laughter oozed behind him, and he ran for the exit door as fast as he could. He bumped into the pretty receptionist who had wished him luck, already doubling over as her skin began to mottle and run, and Roger felt fear move his feet as he charged for the door. He hit it like a fullback, but bounced off as the door refused to open. He slammed into them again and again, but they wouldn't budge. He turned, running down the hall for the side door, but the laughter was already coming up that way too. He was trapped. He had nowhere to go. He had to get out of here, and he saw the broom closet and dived inside. He sat amongst the mops and cleaning implements, his back against the wall, with a mop handle stuck under the door to keep it shut. Outside, he could hear things moving, hear their laughter as they got closer and closer. He dug his phone out and tried 911. He had to get some help. Someone would surely come to help him. The number rang, and after 12 rings, Roger hung up. He called the police, called the fire department, and finally called his manager, Claude. Claude picked up on the third ring. Roger, what's wrong? You're supposed to be on stage. Claude, something's going on in the studio. People are trying to attack me. I need help. He trailed off. What did he need? You? Who would be trying to attack you? You're Raunchy Roger, he said, laughing a little as he said it. Everyone loves you. Why would anyone care enough to hurt someone like you? He broke into laughs between every word, his laughter cutting and jagged as it seemed to tear his throat apart with its intensity. He howled like a beast on the other end of the phone, and Roger could imagine him gasping his sides as he laughed his life away, on and on. His laughter sounded like the lunatic chorus you hear out the asylum window. It sounded like the laughter Roger imagined you'd hear in hell. The voice that came back on the phone was very different. It was liquid, oily, but still recognizable. It was a voice he knew as well as his own. How many times had he cultivated it on stage? How many nights had he talked to himself in just that voice? Roger found himself talking to Raunchy Roger, and the realization made him shudder. Why would anyone care if you lived or died, you stupid hack? They all want me, Raunchy Roger. No one gives a crap about whatever little movie you're managing to spew out. You might as well come out and embrace it, bucko. I'm not going anywhere. His voice was backlit, overpowered, drowned out by the laughter that suddenly bubbled up from the phone, and Roger sat against the wall as the laughter on the phone matched the laughter approaching the door. He suddenly snorted and covered his face with his hands. He couldn't help it. Something about this situation was suddenly just so damn funny.
Good evening, everyone. It's me, Dr. Plague. Thank you so much for joining me for tonight's story.
If you haven't already, I always suggest hit that subscribe button, maybe go ahead and hit that notification bell so you don't miss any of the great stories that we do here. I've got a link below to my latest book if you'd like to pick up your own copy. Follow the link below down to Amazon, and if you'd prefer a signed one, get up with me. I'm sure we can work something out. If you'd like to support the show in a more monetary way, might I suggest heading on down to Patreon. We have several tiers. I'm sure you'll find something that'll suit you. I always recommend my $10 tier, which is my Ghostly Reader tier. You get a signed copy of my book on your doorstep anytime I write one, which is, on average, about twice a year. Speaking of my awesome patrons, let's go ahead and thank them, shall we? Thanks to Janet for being our Spooky Skeleton tier contributor, and thanks to Winter, Xaronan, Emily Coltsfoot, Stephanie Carrington, Marianne Schuler, Jennifer Damron, and Tyler Parker for being our Ghostly Reader tier contributors. Thanks, everyone. We just couldn't do the show without you. And as always, thanks for stopping by. Dr. Plague, signing off. Have a wonderful evening.